And thank you to our witnesses for your participation today. Ambassador Johnson, you touched a bit on agriculture and, I guess in general and in some more specific terms. Obviously, we know we've got a globalized economy, and I think of a business that exports around the world. This business happens to obviously be in my district, but in a town of 300 population. And I hear from them that India's policies have inconsistent tariffs, non-tariff trade barriers, various other challenges. And could you elaborate on that, perhaps?
No, I mean, actually, in combination response to the question that Chairman Nunes asked, and sort of responding to Congressman Neal, is that what India basically wants is agreements on its own terms. Whether you're talking about the WTO, that they actually want to backtrack on tariffs and developing country subsidies, or you're talking about bilateral agreements where they basically leave agriculture out. They include 20 tariff lines out of 600, potentially. And in response to Chairman Nunes, I tried to say that I think this committee showing an aggressive agenda, supporting an aggressive agenda on trade that India would be left out of if they don't start acting in a way that is more conducive to trade, it would be helpful. In agriculture, we see countless, not just a number of SPS barriers, but the goal line keeps moving. If you start addressing one, and then another one seems to pop up. If there's one reason, motivation for it, and you deal with that, then they come up with another reason for justifying a barrier. And then, as we started out by saying, they have very high tariffs, the highest in the world when it comes to agriculture across virtually all of their agricultural industries, and that is very problematic. And it allows them, because they have a high bound rate and they apply it, it gives them so much water, so much protection, that it gives them the flexibility to lower it whenever they need something, if there's a drought or something domestically, but to put it right back up. Well, if you're an exporter, it's hard to build a business around not knowing what's going to happen, either on the tariff side or on the regulatory, sanitary, phytosanitary rules that seem to be somewhat arbitrary at times. I hope that answers your question.
Sure. Now, could you reflect a little bit in terms of the restrictions that are or are not based on sound science and economics?
Well, for example, in the dairy industry, they've had in place a number of regulations that, in fact, have been changing over time that have to do with what we feed our animals, or the drugs that we might use that are internationally recognized and accepted. And then when we go through, and we spend a lot of time assisting the industry on this, when we go through trying to address each one of those problems, we get sort of similar responses to what we heard over here, which is that they're under consideration or they still believe they're justified. And so far we haven't pulled a trigger on a WTO case. Another one is avian influenza, which basically they put a ban in place for low-path avian influenza, which is not an internationally recognized standard. We have the most rigorous system for monitoring and dealing with avian influenza in the world. And India has actually had high-path avian influenza on numerous occasions. And so now we've taken a WTO case against them that the panel was just empowered last month.
So when you say that the policies are changing, could you elaborate on that?
So I know the dairy industry has a paper here, but so for example, when we start working through trying to deal with even things that are not science-based. So for example, they don't want certain drugs to be used in certain for the dairy products that are sent there. So even when we start investigating how we could be identifying suppliers that could address that specific requirement, then we'll find later that there's another reason that those suppliers maybe don't fit the case, or the conversation doesn't continue.
So perhaps it has less to do about public safety than some other.
Oh, clearly, and I think it's pretty clear on a number of these that there's not a human or animal health benefit from the regulations, but really they're effectively acts of protectionism.
Mm-hmm. Would anyone else, Mr. Subramanian?
Yeah, just a thought. The description of going to WTO as pulling the trigger. At one level, that's true, but I think you have to recognize that many of these regulations that are formulated within India come about because of complicated interests. And sometimes having an international ruling which says this is not based on sound science actually helps the pro-liberalization lobby within India to act on those who are against it. So I think that's a big advantage of having, international pressure through, multilateral procedures to kind of put, to strengthen the hands of kind of the good guys within India.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.